Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. We are presenting in live voice tonight and live on YouTube, which you already know if you can hear me. We are joined tonight by special guest storytellers, Kayaker Magic and Mike Lorrey, bringing you the best of sci-fi and live storytelling. All sessions at StoryLink Radio are presented freely. There is never, ever any obligation to tip. In fact, I don't think I even have a tip jar around here anywhere. However, if you have the means, you're so inclined to show your appreciation for the work we present here, feel free to tip your storyteller directly. But again, there's never, ever any obligation to do so. You can learn more about our events, keep track of our various virtual doings at our websites, storylinkradio.com. And we do ask there be no capturing of this voice presentation by any means without checking with us first, please. But we welcome your participation in typed chat comments. And so that's the abbreviated spiel, and housekeeping's over, and on with the story, Sci-Fi Adventures. First up is Kayaker Magic.
So I'm reading a short story called The Fifth Sally, or Turl's Prescription, from the book The Siberiad by Stanislaw Lem. And Stanislaw Lem invented this civilization of mechanical people or creatures that inhabit the entire galaxy. So this civilization of mechanical people has apparently a long history. As a matter of fact, they've lost their prehistory, and philosophers argue about how the first constructor, these robot people that can make things, are called constructors. And so the philosophers ask, who constructed the first constructor? And there's this crazy theory or hypothesis that organic life evolved first in the galaxy and that an organic life form built the first constructor, but nobody takes that idea seriously. So the book The Siberiad is about two famous constructors who are always vying with each other to create machines to impress each other. They're named Turl and Kapausius, and we are only going to meet one of them in this story, the constructor named Turl. And he's working as you'll see as a consultant for some people called the Steely Pips. All right, I'm reading a short story by Stanislaw Lem called The Fifth Sally, or Turl's Prescription, from the book The Siberiad. Oh, and this story makes me think that in the original Polish it must have been a poem. Not very far from here, by a white sun, behind a green star, lived the Steely Pips. Illustrious, industrious, and they hadn't a care. No spats in their vats, no rules, no schools, no gloom, no evil influence of the moon, no trouble from matter or antimatter. For they had a machine, a dream of a machine, with springs and gears and perfect in every respect. And they lived with it, and on it, and under it, and inside it, for it was all they had. First they saved up all their atoms, then they put them all together, and if one didn't fit, why, they chipped at it a bit, and everything was just fine. Each and every Steely Pip had its own little socket and its own little plug, and each was completely on its own. Though they didn't own the machine, neither did the machine own them. Everybody just pitched in. Some were mechanics, others were mechanicians, still others were mechanists, but all were mechanically minded. They had plenty to do, like if night had to be made, or day, or an eclipse of the sun, but that not too often, or they'd grow tired of it. One day there flew up to the white sun behind the green star a comet in a bonnet, namely a female, mean as nails and atomic from her head to her 4 long tails. Awful to look at, all blue from hydrogen cyanide, and sure enough, reeking of bitter almonds. She flew up and said, "First I'll burn you to the ground, and that's just for starters." The Steely Pips watched. The fire in her eyes smoked up half the sky. She drew on her neutrons, mesons like caissons, pi and mu and neutrinos too. Phi, phi, pho, fum, plutonium. And they reply, "One moment, please. We are the Steely Pips. We have no fear, no spats in our vats, no rules, no schools, no gloom, no evil influence of the moon. For we have a machine, a dream of a machine, with springs and gears and perfect in every respect. So go away, Lady Comet, or you'll be sorry. But she already filled up the sky, burning, scorching, roaring, hissing, until their moon shriveled up, singed from horn to horn. And even if it had been a little cracked, old, and on the small side to begin with, still that was a shame. So wasting no more words, they took their strongest fields, tied them around each horn with a good knot, then threw the switch. Try that on for size, you old witch. It thundered, it quaked, it groaned, the sky cleared up in a flash, and all that remained of the comet was a bit of ash, and peace reigned once more. After an indeterminate amount of time, something appears. What it is, nobody knows, except that it's hideous, and no matter from which angle you look at it, it's even more hideous. Whatever it is, flies up, lands on the highest peak, so heavy you can't imagine, makes itself comfortable and doesn't budge. But it's an awful nuisance all the same. So those who are in the proximity say, excuse us, but we are the Steely Pips. We have no dread. We don't live on a planet, but a machine instead. And it's no ordinary machine, but a dream of a machine with springs and gears and perfect in every respect. So beat it, nasty thing, or you'll be sorry. But that just sits there. So, not to go to any great expense, they send not a very big, actually a rather small, scarecrow. It'll go and frighten that off, and peace will reign once more. The scarecrow sets off, and all you can hear inside are its programs whirring, one more frightening than the next. It approaches, how it hisses, how it spits. It even scares itself a little, but that just sits there. The scarecrow tries once more, this time on a different frequency, but by now it just doesn't have its heart in it. The Steely Pips see that something else is needed. They say, let's take a higher caliber, hydraulic, differential, exponential, plastic, stochastic, and with plenty of muscle. It won't cower if it has nuclear power. So they send it off, universal, reversible, double-barreled, feedback on every track. All systems go hi-ho. And inside one mechanic and one mechanist. And that's not all, because just to be on the safe side, they stuck a scarecrow on top. It arrived, so well oiled you could hear a pin drop. It winds up for the swing and counts down. 4 quarters, 3 quarters, 2 quarters, 1 quarter, no quarter. Kaboom! What a blow. See the mushroom grow. The mushroom with the radioactive glow. And the oil bubbles, the gears chatter, the mechanic and the mechanist peer out the hatch. Can you imagine? Not even a scratch. The Steely Pips held a council of war and then built a mechanism, which in turn built a meta-mechanism, which in turn built such a megalo-mechanism that the closest stars had to step back. And in the middle of it was a machine with cogs and wheels, and in the middle of that, a servo spook, just because they really meant business now. The megalo mechanism gathered up all its strength and let go. Thunder, rumbling, chatter, a mushroom so huge you'd need an ocean to make soup out of it. The clenching of teeth, darkness, so much darkness that you can't even tell what's what. The Steely Pips look nothing, not a thing, just all their mechanisms lying around like so much scrap metal and without a sign of life. Now they rolled up their sleeves. After all, they say, we are mechanics and mechanists, all mechanically minded, and we have a machine, a dream of a machine with springs and gears and perfect in every respect. So how can this nasty thing just sit there and not budge? They make nothing less than an enormous cybervidi bushwhacker. It'll creep up casually, as if minding its own business, glance over its shoulder, grow a little bolder, send out a root or two, grow up from behind, taking its time, and then when it closes in, that will be the end of that. And truly, everything happened exactly as predicted, except, when it was all over, that wasn't exactly the end of that, not at all. They fell into despair, and they didn't even know what to think because this had never happened to them before. So they mobilized and analyzed, made nets and glues, lariats and screws, taps and contraptions to make it drown, break it down, make it fall, or maybe wall it up. They tried this way and that way and the other, but one is as poor as another. They turn everything upside down, but nothing helps. They're about ready to give up hope when suddenly they see someone's coming. He's on horseback, but no, horses don't have wheels. It must be a bicycle. But wait, bicycles don't have prows, so maybe it's a rocket, but rockets don't have saddles. What he's riding on, no one can tell, but who's in the saddle we all know well. It's Turl himself, the constructor, out on a spree, or maybe on one of his famous sallies, serene and smiling, coaling closer, flying by, but even from a distance, you'd know that this wasn't just anybody. He lowers, he hovers, so they tell him the whole story. Starting with, of course, we are the Steely Pips. We have a machine, a dream of a machine with springs and gears and perfect in every respect. We saved up all our atoms, put them all together ourselves. We hadn't a care. No spats in our vats, no rules, no schools, until something flew up, landed, sat down, and won't budge. Did you try scaring it off? Turl asks with a kindly smile. We tried a scarecrow and a servo spook and a megalomechanism, all hydraulic and high caliber, spouting mesons like caissons, pi and mu and neutrinos too, protons and photons, but nothing worked. No machine, you say? No, sir, no machine. Interesting. And what exactly is it? That we don't know. It appeared, flew here. What it is, nobody knows, except that it's hideous, and no matter from which angle you look at it, it's even more hideous. It flew up, landed, so heavy you can't imagine, and just sits there. But it's an awful nuisance all the same. Well, I really don't have much time, says Turl. The most I can do is stay here for a while, and in an advisory capacity. Is that agreeable with you? It certainly is, and the Steely Pips immediately ask what he wants them to bring. Photons, screws, hammers, artillery, or how about some dynamite or TNT, and would our guest like coffee or tea? From a vending machine, of course. Coffee's fine, agrees Turl, but not for me, but for the business at hand. As for the rest of it, I don't think so. You see, if neither Scarecrow nor Servo Spook nor Cybervity Bushwhacker will do the job, then other methods are indicated. Archaic and archival, legalistic, hence sadistic. I've yet to see the remittance due and payable in full fail. Come again, asked the Steely Pips, but Turl, rather than explain, continues. It's quite simple, really. All you need is paper, ink, stamps and seals, sealing wax and thumbtacks, sand to sprinkle, blotters, a teller window, a zinc teaspoon, a saucer, the coffee we already have, and a mailman, and something to write with. Do you have that? We'll get it, and they take off. Turl pulls up a chair and dictates. Notice is hereby given that in RE, hindrance of tenant, as stated under Rev Stat C117E-2-KKP4 of the CTSP Com Code, in clear violation of paragraph 199, thereby constituting a most reprehensible offense, we do declare the termination, dissemination, and full cessation of all services, AC, curing thereunto by authority of Ordinance 67 DPO number 14J1101 at SEC on this, the 19th day of the 17th month of the current year, AFG 77F Supplemental 301. The tenant may appeal said action by extraordinary procedure to the chairman of the board within 24 hours. Attaches the seal, affixes the stamp, has it entered in the central ledger, consults the office register, and says, now let the mailman deliver it. The mailman takes it. They wait. The mailman returns. Did you deliver it? asks Turl. I did. And the return receipt? Here it is, signed on this line. And here's the appeal. Turl takes the appeal, and without reading it at all, orders it returned to sender and writes diagonally across it, unacceptable, proper forms not attached. And he signs his name illegibly. And now, he says, to work. He sits and writes, while those who are curious look on, and understanding nothing, ask what this is and what that's supposed to do. Official business, answers Turl, and things will go well now that it's underway. The mailman runs back and forth all day like one possessed. Turl notarizes, issues directives, the typewriter clatters, and little by little, an entire office takes shape. Rubber stamps and rubber bands, paper clips and paper wads, portfolios and pigeonholes, foolscap and script, teaspoons, signs that say, no admittance, inkwells, forms on file, writing all the while, the typewriter chattering, and everywhere you look you see coffee stains, waste paper, and bits of gum eraser. The Steely Pips are worried. They don't understand a thing. Meanwhile, Turl uses a special delivery registered COD certified with return receipt or, best of all, remittance due and payable in full. He sends out no end of dunning letters, bills of lading, notices, injunctions, and there are already special accounts set up. No entries at the moment, but he says that's only temporary. After a while, you can see that is not quite so hideous, especially in profile. It's actually gotten smaller. Yes, it's smaller. The Steely Pips asked Turl. What now? No idle talk permitted on the premises, is his answer. And he staples, stamps, inspects, vouches, revokes licenses, dots an I, loosens his tie, asks who's next. I'm sorry, the office is closed. Come back in an hour. The coffee is cold, the cream sour, cobwebs from ceiling to floor, an old pair of nylons in the secretary's drawer. Install 4 new file cabinets over here, and there's an attempt to bribe an official. A pile of problems and a problem with piles, a writ of execution, incarceration for miscegenation, and appeals with 7 seals. And the typewriter chatters. Whereas, pursuant to the tenant's failure to quit and surrender the demised premises in compliance with the warrant served, habeas facias possessionem, by division of Representative Cyber GT KRS thereof, the count of third insistence in vacu and ex nihilo, herein orders the immediate evacuation and vaccination thereunder. The tenant may not appeal this ruling. Turl dispatches the messenger and pockets the receipts, after which he gets up and methodically hurls the desks, chairs, rubber stamps, seals, pigeonholes, etc. out into deep space. Only the vending machine remains. What on earth are you doing? Cried the Steely Pips in dismay, having grown accustomed to it all. How can you? Tut tut, my dears, he replies. Better you take a look yourself. And indeed, they look and gasp. Why, there's nothing there. It's gone. It's as if it had never been. And where did it go? Vanished into thin air? It beat a cowardly retreat and grew so small, so very small, you'd need a magnifying glass to see it. They root around, but all they can find is one little spot, slightly damp. Something must have dripped here, but what or why they cannot say. And that's all. Just as I thought, Turl tells them. Basically, my dears, the whole thing was quite simple. The moment it accepted the first dispatch and signed for it, it was done for. I employed a special machine, the machine with a big B, for as the cosmos is the cosmos, no one's licked it yet. All right, but why throw out the documents and pour out the coffee? They ask. So that it wouldn't devour you in turn, Turl replies, and he flies off, nodding to them kindly, and his smile is like the stars. The end. I assume the big B is bureaucracy.
I love that. I love the poetry to it, too. All you need is paper, ink, stamps, seals, sealing wax, thumbtack, sand to sprinkle, blotters, teller windows, ink, tailspin, and a mailman. Quite simple. Thank you, Mr. Magic. And then
that was great. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Lorrey is up.
Fantastic.
Requiem from Robert Heinlein.
Thank you. So Requiem is essentially a sequel to one of Heinlein's other Golden Age greats, The Man Who Sold the Moon. And so it's a D.D. Harriman, the main character of The Man Who Sold the Moon, is now an old, very old man, and he was prevented by his company, which got taken over by others, from ever going to the moon, and he was trapped on Earth, and he was basically prohibited by law from actually leaving the planet, and so just as revenge by the people who took over his company. So this is a story about him as an old man. On a high hill in Samoa, there is a grave. Inscribed on the marker are these words: "Under the wide and starry sky, dig my grave and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This be the verse which you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor home from the sea, and the hunter came home from the hill." These lines appear in another place, scrawled on a shipping tag, torn from a compressed air container, and pinned to the ground with a knife. It wasn't much of a fair as fairs go. The trotting races didn't promise much excitement, even though several entries claimed the blood of the immortal Dan Patch. The tents and concession booths barely covered the circus grounds, and the pitchmen seemed discouraged. D.D. Harriman's chauffeur could not see any reason for stopping. They were due in Kansas City for a directors' meeting. That is to say, Harriman was. The chauffeur had private reasons for promptness, reasons involving Darktown Society on 18th Street, but the boss not only stopped but hung around. Bunting and a canvas arch made the entrance to a large enclosure beyond the racetrack. Red and gold letters announced, "This way to the moon rocket. See it in actual flight. Public demonstration flights, twice daily. This is the actual type used by the first man to reach the moon. You can ride in it, $50. A boy, 9 or 10 years old, hung around the entrance and stared at the posters. "Want to see the ship, son?" The kid's eyes shone. "Gee, mister, I sure would." "So would I. Come on." Harriman paid out $1 for 2 pink tickets, which entitled them to enter the enclosure and examine the rocket ship. The kid took his and ran ahead with the single-mindedness of youth. Harriman looked over the stubby, curved lines of the ovoid body. He noted with a professional eye that she was a single-jet type, with fractional controls around her midriff. He squinted through his glasses at the name painted in gold on the carnival red of the body. Carefree was its name. He paid another quarter to enter the control cabin. When his eyes had adjusted to the gloom caused by the strong ray filters of the ports, he let them rest lovingly on the keys of the console and the semicircle of dials above. Each beloved gadget was in its proper place. He knew them, graven in his heart. While he mused over the instrument board, with the warm liquid of content soaking through his body, the pilot entered and touched his arm. "Sorry, sir, we've got to cast loose for the flight." "Eh?" Harriman started, then looked at the speaker. Handsome devil with a good skull and strong shoulders, reckless eyes, and a self-indulgent mouth, but a firm chin. "Oh, excuse me, Captain." "Quite all right." "Oh, I say, Captain, McIntyre. Captain McIntyre. Could you take a passenger this trip?" The old man leaned eagerly towards him. "Why, yes, if you wish. Come along with me." He ushered Harriman into a shed marked office, which stood near the gate. "Passenger for the check-over, Doc." Harriman looked startled, but permitted the medico to run a stethoscope over his thin chest and to strap a rubber bandage around his arm. Presently he unstrapped it, glanced at McIntyre, and shook his head. "No go, Doc?" "That's right, Captain." Harriman looked from face to face. "My heart's all right. That's just a flutter." The physician's brows shot up. "Is it? But it's not just your heart. It's your age. Your bones are too brittle to risk a takeoff." "Sorry, sir," added the pilot, "but the Bates County Fair Association pays the doctor here to see to it that I don't take anyone up who might be hurt by the acceleration." The old man's shoulders slumped miserably. "I rather expected it." Sorry, sir. McIntyre turned to go, but Harriman followed him out. Excuse me, Captain. Yes? Could you and your engineer have dinner with me after your flight? The pilot looked at him quizzically. I don't see why not, thanks. Captain McIntyre, it's difficult for me to see why anyone would quit the Earth-Moon run. Fried chicken and hot biscuits in a private dining room in the best hotel in the little town of Butler afforded. 3-star Hennessy and Coronas had produced a friendly atmosphere in which the three men could talk freely. Well, I don't like it. Oh, don't give him that, Mac. You know damn well it was Rule G that got you. McIntyre's mechanic poured himself another brandy as he spoke. McIntyre looked sullen. Well, what if I did take a couple of drinks anyhow? I could have squared that. It was the damn persnickety regulations that got me fed up. Who are you to talk, smuggler? Sure I smuggled. Who wouldn't with all these beautiful rocks just aching to be taken back to Earth? I had a diamond once as big as... But if I hadn't been caught, I'd be in Luna City tonight. And so would you, you drunken blaster. With the boys buying drinks and the girls smiling and making suggestions. He put his face down and began to weep quietly. McIntyre shook him. He's drunk. Never mind, Harrisman said, interposing a hand. Tell me, are you really satisfied not to be on the run anymore? McIntyre chewed his lip. No, he's right, of course. This barnstorming isn't what it's all cracked up to be. We've been hopping junk at every pumpkin doings and up and down the Mississippi Valley, sleeping in tourist camps and eating at grease burners. Half the time the sheriff has an attachment on the ship, the other half the Society for the Prevention of something or other gets an injunction to keep us on the ground. It's no sort of a life for a rocket man. Would it help you, Frenny, to get to the moon? Well, yes, I couldn't get back to the Earth-Moon run, but if I was in Luna City, I could get a job hopping ore for the company. They're always short of rocket pilots for that, and they wouldn't mind my record. If I keep my nose clean, they might even put me back on the run in time. Harriman fiddled with a spoon and looked up. Would you young gentlemen be open to a business proposition? Perhaps. What is it? Your own, the Carefree? Yeah, that is. Charlie and I do, barring a couple of liens against her. What about it? I want to charter her for you and Charlie to take me to the moon. Charlie sat up with a jerk. Did you hear what I said? He said, Mac, he wants us to fly that old heap to the moon. McIntyre shook his head. Can't do it, Mr. Harriman. The old boat's worn out. You couldn't convert the escape fuel. We don't even use standard juice on her. It's just gasoline and liquid air. Charlie spends all his time tinkering with her at that. She's going to blow up someday. Say, Mr. Harriman, put in Charlie, what's the matter with getting an excursion permit and going in a company ship? No, son, the old man replied, I can't do that. You know the conditions under which the UN granted the company a monopoly on lunar exploitation. No one to enter space who is not physically qualified to stand up under it. The company to take full responsibility for the safety and health of all citizens beyond the stratosphere. The official reason for granting the franchise was to avoid an unnecessary risk of life during the first few years of space travel. And you can't pass the physical exam? Harriman shook his head. Well, what the hell, if you can afford to hire us, why don't you just bribe yourself a brace of company docs? It's been done before. Harriman smiled ruefully. I know it has, Charlie, but it won't work for me, you see. I'm a tad too prominent. My full name is Delos D. Harriman. What? You're old DD? The hell's bells, you own a big slice of the company yourself. You practically are the company. You ought to be able to do anything you like, rules or no rules. That's not an unusual opinion, son, but it is incorrect. Rich men aren't more free than other men. They are less free, a good deal less free. I tried to do what you suggest, but the other directors would not permit me. They're afraid of losing their franchise. It costs them a good deal in political contact expenses to retain it as it is. Well, I'll be can you tie that, Mac? A guy with lots of dough and he can't spend it the way he wants to. McIntyre did not answer, but waited for Harriman to continue. Captain McIntyre, if you had a ship, would you take me? McIntyre rubbed his chin. It's against the law. I'd make it worth your while. Sure he would, Mr. Harriman. Of course he would. Mac, Luna City, oh baby. Why do you want to go to the moon so badly, Mr. Harriman? Captain, it's the one thing I've really wanted to do all my life, ever since I was a young boy. I don't know whether I can explain it to you or not. You young fellows have grown up to rocket travel the way I grew up to aviation. I'm a great deal older than you are, at least 50 years older. When I was a kid, practically nobody believed that men would ever reach the moon. You've seen rockets all your lives, and the first to reach the moon got there before you were a young boy. When I was a boy, they laughed at the idea. But I believed. I read Verne and Wells and Smith, and I believed that we could do it, that we would do it. Set my heart on being one of the men to walk the surface of the moon, see the other side, and to look back on the face of the earth hanging in the sky. I used to go without my lunches to pay my dues in the American Rocket Society, because I wanted to believe that I was helping to bring the day nearer when we would reach the moon. Yeah. Well, the highlights of the writer here. I was already an old man when that day arrived. I lived longer than I should, but I would not let myself die. Will not, until I have set foot on the moon. McIntyre stood up, and he put out his hand. You find a ship, Mr. Harriman. I'll drive her. Attaboy, Mac. I told you he would, Mr. Harriman. Harriman mused and dozed during the half-hour run to north into Kansas City, dozed in the light of troubled sleep of old age. Incidents out of a long life ran through his mind of vagrant dreams. There was that time, oh yes, 1910, a little boy on a warm spring night. What's that, Daddy? That's Halley's Comet, sonny. Where did it come from? I don't know, son, from way out in the sky somewhere. It's beautiful, Daddy. I want to touch it. Afraid not, son. Delos, do you mean to stand there and tell me you put the money we had saved for the house into that crazy rocket company? Now, Charlotte, please, it's not crazy. It's a sound business investment. Someday soon, rockets will fill the sky. Ships and trains will be obsolete. Look what happened to the men that had the foresight to invest in Henry Ford. We've been all over this before. Charlotte, the day will come when men will rise up off the earth and visit the moon, even the planets. This is the beginning. Must you shout? I'm sorry, but I feel a headache coming on. Please try to be a little quiet when you come to bed. He hadn't gone to bed. He had sat out on the veranda all night long, watching the full moon move across the sky. There would be the devil to pay in the morning, the devil and a thin-lipped silence. But he'd stick by his guns. He'd given in on most things, but not on this. But the night was his. Tonight he'd be alone with his old friend. He'd searched her face. Where was Mayor Crisium? Funny, he couldn't make it out. He used to be able to see it plainly when he was a boy. Probably needed new glasses. His constant office work wasn't good for his eyes. But he didn't need to see. He knew where they all were. Crisium, Mare Fecunditatis, Mare Tranquillitatis. That one had a satisfying role. The Apennines, the Carpathians, old Tycho and its mysterious rays. 240,000 miles, 10 times around the earth. Surely men could bridge that little gap just like that. Why, he could almost reach out and touch it, nodding there behind the elm trees. Not that he could help. He hadn't the education. Son, I want to have a little serious talk with you. Yes, Mother. I know you hope to go to college next year. Hoped you'd live for it. The University of Chicago to study under Moulton. Then on to the Yerkes Observatory to work under the eye of Dr. Frost himself. And I had hoped to do so too, but with your father's gone and the girls growing up, it's harder to make ends meet. You've been a good boy and worked hard to help out. I know you understand. Yes, Mother. Extra, extra. Stratosphere rocket reaches Mars. Read all about it. The little man in the bifocal snatched the paper and hurried back to the office. Look at this, George, huh? Interesting. What is it? Can't you see the next stage is to the moon? God, but you're a sucker, Delos. The trouble with you is you read too many of those trashy magazines. Now, I caught my boy reading one of them just last week. Stunning Stories or some such title, and dressed him down proper. Your folks would have done you the same favor. Harriman squared his narrow, middle-aged shoulders. They will so reach the moon, his partner laughed. Have it your own way. If baby wants the moon, Papa brings it for him. But you stick to your discounts and commissions. That's where the money is. The big car droned down the patio, turned off on Armour Boulevard. Old Harriman stirred uneasily in his sleep and muttered to himself. But Mr. Harriman, the young man with the notebook plainly perturbed. The old man grunted. You heard me. Sell 'em. I want every share I own realized as cash as rapidly as possible. Spaceways Provisioning Company, Artemis Mines, Luna City Recreations, a whole lot of them. It will depress the market. You won't realize the full value of your holdings. Don't you think I know that? I can afford it. What about the shares you had earmarked for Richardson Observatory or for the Harriman scholarships? Oh, yes, don't sell those. Set up a trust. Should have done it long ago. Tell young Carmans to draw up all the papers. He knows what I want. The interoffice visor flashed into life. The gentlemen are here, Mr. Harriman. Send them in. That's all, Ashley. Get busy. Ashley went off as McIntyre and Charlie entered. Harriman got up and trotted forward to greet them. Come in, boys, come in. I'm glad to see you. Sit down, have a cigar. Mighty pleased to see you, Mr. Harriman, acknowledged Charlie. In fact, you might say we need to see you. Some trouble, gentlemen? Harriman glanced from face to face. McIntyre answered him. You still mean that about the job for us, Mr. Harriman? Mean it? Certainly I do. You're not backing out on me? Not at all. We need that job now. You see, the Carefree is lying in the middle of the Osage River with her jet split clear back to the injector. Dear me, you weren't hurt? No, aside from sprains and bruises, we jumped. Charlie chortled. I caught a catfish with my bare teeth. In short order, they got down to business. You two will have to buy a ship for me. I can't do it openly. My colleagues would figure out what I mean to do and stop me. I'll supply you with all the cash you need. You go out and locate some sort of a ship that can be refitted for the trip. Work up some good story about you're buying it for some playboy as a Stratosphere jet, or you plan to establish an Arctic-Antarctic tourist route or something. Anything as long as no one suspects she's being outfitted for spaceflight. Then after the Department of Transport licenses her for stratoflight, you move out to a place in the desert out west. I'll find a likely parcel of land and buy it, then I'll join you. Then we'll install the escape fuel tanks, change the injectors and the timers and so forth, and fit her for the hop. How about it? McIntyre looked dubious. It'll take a lot of doing, Charlie. Do you think you can accomplish that changeover without a dockyard and shops? Me, sure I can. With your thick-fingered help, just give me the tools and the materials I want, and don't hurry me too much. Of course, it won't be fancy. Nobody wants it to be fancy. I just want a ship that won't blow up when I start slapping the keys. Isotope fuel is no joke. It won't blow, Mac. That's what you thought about the Carefree. That ain't fair, Mac. I ask you, Mr. Harriman. That heap was junk and we knew it. This'll be different. We're going to spend some dough and do it right, aren't we, Mr. Harriman? Harriman patted him on the shoulder. Certainly we are, Charlie. You can have all the money you want. That's the least of our worries. Now, do the salaries and bonuses I mentioned suit you? I don't want you to be short. As you know, my clients are his nearest relatives and have his interests at heart. We contend that Mr. Harriman's conduct for the past several weeks, as shown by the evidence here adduced, gives clear indication that a mind once brilliant in the world of finance has become senile. It is therefore with deepest regret we pray this honorable court, if it pleases, to declare Mr. Harriman incompetent and to assign a conservative to protect his financial interests and those of his future heirs and assigns. The attorney sat down, pleased with himself. Mr. Cammons took the floor. May it please the court, if my esteemed friend is quite through, may I suggest that in his last few words he gave away his entire thesis, the financial interests of future heirs and assigns. It is evident that the petitioners believe that my client should conduct his affairs in such sure that his nieces and nephews and their issue will be supported in unearned luxury for the rest of their lives. My client's wife has passed on. He has no children. It is admitted that he has provided generously for his sisters and their children in times past. and that he has established annuities such as near kin as are without means or petitioners, but now like vultures, worse than vultures, for they are not content to let him die in peace. They would prevent my client from enjoying his wealth in whatever manner best suits him for the few remaining years of his life. Is it true that he has sold his holdings? Is it strange that an elderly man should wish to retire? Is it true? The value of a thing is what that thing will bring. He was retiring and demanded cash. Is there anything strange about that? It is admitted that he refused to discuss his actions with his loving kinfolk. What law or principle requires a man to consult with his nephews on anything? Therefore, we pray this court will confirm my client has his right to do what he likes with his own, deny this petition, and send these meddlers about their business. The judge took off his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully. Mr. Commons, this court has a high regard for individual liberty as you have. You may rest assured that any action taken will be solely in the interest of your client. Nevertheless, men do grow old, men do become senile, and in such cases must be protected. I shall take this matter under advisement until tomorrow. Court is adjourned. From the Kansas City Star. Eccentric millionaire disappears. Failed to appear at the adjourned hearing, the bailiffs returned from the search of places usually frequented by Harriman with the report that he had not been seen since the previous day. A bench warrant is under contempt proceedings has been issued, and a desert sunset is a better stimulant for the appetite than a hot dance orchestra. Charlie testified to this by polishing the last of the ham gravy with a piece of bread. Harriman handed each of the younger men cigars and took one for himself. My doctor claims that these weeds are bad for my heart condition, he remarked as he lighted it. But I felt so much better since I joined you boys here in the ranch that I am inclined to doubt him. He exhaled a cloud of blue-gray smoke and resumed. I don't think that a man's health depends so much on what he does as to whether he wants to do it. I'm doing what I want to do. That's all a man can ask of life, agreed McIntyre. How does the work look now, boys? My end's in pretty good shape, Charlie answered. We finished the second pressure test on the new ship tanks and the fuel lines today. The ground tests are all done except the calibration runs. These won't take long, just 4 hours to make the runs if we don't run into some bugs. How about you, Mac? McIntyre ticked them off on his fingers. Food supplies and water on board, 3 vacuum suits in a spare, and service kits, medical supplies. The buggy already had all the standard equipment for stratoflight. The late lunar ephemeroids haven't arrived as yet. When do you expect them? Anytime. They should be here now. Not that it matters. This gulf about how hard it is to navigate from here to the moon is hokum to impress the public. After all, you can see your destination. It's not like ocean navigation. Give me a sextant and a good radar, and I'll set you down at any place on the moon you like without cracking an almanac or a star table. Just from a general knowledge of the relative speeds involved. Never mind the personal build-up, Columbus, Charlie told him. We'll admit you can hit the floor with your hat. The general idea is you're ready to go now, is that right? That's it. That being the case, I could run those tests tonight. I'm getting jumpy. Things have been going too smoothly. If you give me a hand, we ought to be in bed by midnight. Okay, when I finish this cigar. They smoked in silence for a while, each thinking about the coming trip and what it meant to him. Old Harriman tried to repress the excitement and that it possessed him at the prospect of immediate realization of his lifelong dream. Mr. Harriman, what is it, Charlie? How does a guy go about getting rich like you did? Getting rich? I can't say. I never tried to get rich. I never wanted to be rich or well known or anything like that. Huh? No, I just wanted to live a long time and see it all happen. I wasn't unusual. There were a lot of boys like me. Radio hams they were, and telescope builders, airplane amateurs. We had science clubs and basement laboratories and science fiction leagues. The kind of boys who thought there was more romance to one issue of the Electrical Experimenter than all the books that Dumas ever wrote. We didn't want to be one of Horatio Alger's get-rich heroes either. We wanted to build spaceships. Well, some of us did. Geez, Pop, you make it sound exciting. It was exciting, Charlie. This has been wonderful, a romantic century for all its bad points, and it's grown more wonderful and more exciting every year. No, didn't want to be rich. I just wanted to live long enough to see man rise up to the stars, and if God was good to me, to go as far as the moon myself. He carefully deposited an inch of white ash in the saucer. It's been a good life. I haven't any complaints. McIntyre pushed back his chair. Come on, Charlie, if you're ready. They all got up. Harriman started to speak, then grabbed his chest, his face a dead gray white. Catch him, Mac. Where's his medicine? In his vest pocket. They eased him over to a couch, broke a small glass capsule in a handkerchief, and held it under his nose. The volatile gas released by the capsule seemed to bring a little color into his face. They did what they could for him, little enough, and then waited for him to regain consciousness. Charlie broke the uneasy silence. Mac, we ain't going to go through with this. Why not? It's murder. He'll never stand up under the initial acceleration. Maybe not, but it's what he wants to do. You heard him. But we oughtn't let him. Why not? It's neither your business nor the business of this damn paternalistic government to tell a man not to risk his life doing what he really wants to do. All the same, I don't feel right about it. He's such a swell old duck. Then what do you want to do with him? Send him back to Kansas City so those old harpies can shut him up in a laughing academy till he dies of a broken heart? No, not that. Get out there and make your setup for these test runs. I'll be along. A wide, tired desert runabout rolled in the ranch yard gate the next morning and stopped in front of the house. A heavy-set man with a firm but kindly face climbed out and spoke to McIntyre, who had approached to meet him. You James McIntyre? What about it? I'm the deputy federal marshal hereabouts. I got a warrant for your arrest. What's the charge? Conspiracy to violate the Space Precautionary Act. Charlie joined the pair. What's up, Mac? The deputy answered, You be Charles Cummings, I guess. Warrant here for you. Got one for a man named Harriman, too. And a court order to put your seals on your spaceship. We've got no spaceship. What do you keep in that big shed? A strato yacht. So, well, I'll put seals on her until a spaceship comes along. Where's Harriman? Right in there, Charlie obliged by pointing, ignoring McIntyre's scowl. The deputy turned his head. Charlie couldn't have missed the button by a fraction of an inch, for the deputy collapsed quietly to the ground. Charlie stood over him, rubbing his knuckles in mourning. Damn it to hell, that's the finger I broke playing shortstop. I'm always hurting that finger. Get Pop into the cabin, Mac cut him short, and strap him into his hammock. Aye, aye, Skipper. They dragged the ship by tractor out to the hangar, turned and went out to the desert plain to find elbow room for the takeoff. They climbed into the rocket. McIntyre saw the deputy from his starboard conning port. He was staring very disconsolately after him. McIntyre fastened his safety belt, settled his corset, and spoke into the engineering speaking tube. Speaking tube. All set, Charlie? All set, Skipper. But you can't raise ship yet, Mac. She ain't named. No time for your superstitions. Harriman's thin voice reached him. Call her the Lunatic. It's the only appropriate name. McIntyre settled his head into his pads, punched 2 keys, and the Lunatic raised ground. How are you, Pop? Charlie searched the old man's face anxiously. Harriman licked his lips and managed to speak. Doing fine, son. Couldn't be better. The acceleration is over. It won't be so bad from here on. I'll unstrap you so you can wiggle around a little. But I think you better stay in the hammock. He tugged at buckles. Harriman partially repressed a groan. What is it, Pop? Nothing. Nothing at all. Just go easy on that side. Charlie ran his fingers under the old man's side with a sure, delicate touch of a mechanic. You ain't fooling me none, Pop. There isn't much I can do till we ground. Charlie? Yes, Pop? Can't I move to a port? I want to watch the Earth. Ain't nothing to see yet. The ship hides it. As soon as we turn ship, I'll move you. Tell you what. I'll give you a sleepy pill, then wake you up when we do. No. Huh? I'll stay awake. Just as you say, Pop. Charlie clambered monkey fashion to the nose of the ship and anchored to the gimbals in the pilot's chair. McIntyre questioned him with his eyes. Yeah, he's alive all right, Charlie told him, but he's in bad shape. How bad? Couple of cracked ribs anyhow. I don't know what else. I don't know whether he'll last out the trip, Mac. His heart was pounding something awful. He'll last, Charlie. He's tough. Tough? He's delicate as a canary. I don't mean that. He's tough way down inside where it counts. Just the same, you better set her down awful easy if you want to ground with a full complement aboard. I will. I'll make one full swing around the moon and ease her in on an involute approach curve. We've got enough fuel, I think. They were now in free orbit. After McIntyre turned ship, Charlie went back, unslung the hammock, and moved Harriman, hammock and all, to a side port. McIntyre steadied the ship about a transverse axis, so the tail pointed towards the sun, then gave a short blast on two tangential jets opposed in couple to cause the ship to spin slowly about her longitudinal axis, and thereby create a slight artificial gravity. The initial weightlessness when coasting commenced had knotted the old man with the characteristic nausea of free flight, and the pilot wished to save his passenger as much discomfort as possible. But Harriman was not concerned with the condition of his stomach. There it was, as he had imagined it so many times. The moon swung majestically past the viewport, wider than he had ever seen it before, and all of her familiar features became clear. She gave way to the earth as the ship continued its slow swing. The earth itself, as he had envisioned her, appearing like a noble moon, many times as wide as the moon appears to the earthbound, and more luscious, more sensuously beautiful than the silver moon could be. It was sunset near the Atlantic seaboard. The line of shadow cut down the coastline of North America, slashed through Cuba, and obscured all but the west coast of South America. He savored the mellow blue of the Pacific Ocean, felt the texture of the soft green and brown of the continents, admired the blue-white cold of the polar caps. Canada and the northern states were obscured by cloud, a vast low-pressure area that spread across the continent. It shone with an even more satisfactory, dazzling white than the polar caps. As the ship swung slowly around, Earth would pass from view, and the stars would march across the port, same stars he had always known, but steady, brighter, and unwinking against the screen of perfect live black. Then the moon would swim into view again and claim his thoughts. He was serenely happy in a fashion not given to most men, even in a long lifetime. He felt as if he were every man who has ever lived, looked up at the stars and longed. As the long hours came, and he went and watched and dove and dreamed, at least once he must have fallen into a deep sleep, or possibly delirium, for he came to with a start, thinking that his wife, Charlotte, was calling to him. Delos, the voice had said, Delos, come in from there. You'll catch your death of cold in the night air. Poor Charlotte, she'd been a good wife to him. A good wife. He was quite sure that her only regret in dying had been her fear that he could not take proper care of himself. It had not been her fault that she had not shared his dream and his need. Charlie rigged the hammock in such a fashion that Harriman could watch from the starboard port when they swung around the far face of the moon. He picked out the landmarks made familiar to him by 1,000 photographs with nostalgic pleasure, as if he were returning to his own country. McIntyre brought her slowly down as they came back around to the earthward face, and prepared to land east of Mare Fecunditatis, about 10 miles from Luna City. It was not a bad landing, all things considered. He had to land without coaching from the ground, and he had no second pilot to watch the radar for him. In his anxiety to make it gentle, he missed his destination by some 30 miles, but he did his cold sober best. But at that it was bumpy, as they grounded and pumice settled around them. Charlie came up to the control station. How's our passenger? Mac demanded. I'll see, but I wouldn't make any bets. That landing stunk, Mac. Damn it, I did my best. I know you did, Skipper. Forget it. But the passenger was alive and conscious, although bleeding from his nose, with a pink foam in his lips. He was feebly trying to get himself out of his cocoon. They helped him, working together. "Where are the vacuum suits?" was his first remark. "Steady, Mr. Harriman. You can't go out there yet. We've got to give you some first aid." "Get me that suit. First aid can wait." Silently, they did as he ordered. His left leg was practically useless, and they had to help him through the lock, one on each side. But with his inconsiderable mass having a lunar weight of only 20 pounds, he was no burden. They found a place some 50 yards from the ship where they could prop him up and let him look, a chunk of scoria supporting his head. McIntyre put his helmet against the old man's and spoke. "We'll leave you here to enjoy the view while we get ready for the trek into town. It's a 40-miler pretty near, and we'll have to break out the spare air bottles and rations and stuff. We'll be back soon." Harriman nodded without answering, squeezed their gauntlets with a grip that was surprisingly strong. He sat very quietly, rubbing his hands against the soil of the moon and sensing the curiously light pressure of his body against the ground. At long last he was at peace in his heart. His hurts had ceased to pain him. He was where he had longed to be, and he had followed his need. Over the western horizon hung the earth, at last quartered, a green-blue giant moon. Overhead the sun shone down from a black and starry sky, and underneath the moon, the soil of the moon itself, he was on the moon. He lay back still while a bath of contentment flowed over him like a tide at flood, and soaked into his very marrow. His attention strayed momentarily. He thought once again that his name was called. Silly, he thought. I'm getting old. My mind wanders. Back in the cabin, Charlie and Mac were rigging shoulder yokes on a stretcher. "There, that will do," Mac commented. "We better stir Pop out where we ought to be going." "I'll get him," Charlie replied. "I'll just pick him up and carry. He won't weigh nothing." Charlie was gone longer than McIntyre had expected him to be. He returned alone. Mac waited for him to close the lock and swung back his helmet. "Trouble? Never mind the stretcher, Skipper. We won't be needing it." "Yeah, I mean it," he continued. "Pop's done for. I did what was necessary." McIntyre bent down without a word and picked up the wide skis necessary to negotiate the powdery ash of the moon. Charlie followed his example. Then they swung the spare air bottles over their shoulders and passed out through the lock. They didn't bother to close the outer door of the lock behind them. The end. And that was Requiem.